Before I continue, I want to rotate the reference image around 45 degrees. And by doing that, we're getting horizontal and vertical lines here, which will make it a lot easier to create these rows of puzzle pieces. I'm also going to rotate the hard outline 45 degrees. All of the protrusions pretty much have the same shape, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a nice one that I'm going to use for the Gap Spline, and I think it's going to be this one here. In this video I'm going to take a slightly different approach to modeling the Gap Spline. For this one, for example, I'm going to start with a Helper Spline, and I'll explain why we need that in a minute. So let's grab our pen tool, and I'm going to switch the type from Bezier to linear so we can draw straight lines. And now we just need to left click to create points, and we don't need any tangents for these, which is why I switched the type to linear. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to line these points up with that black line in the reference image. So something like this. And over here things are looking pretty good. So let's deselect the spline. In fact, I'll switch it off for now. And let's grab the pen tool again, switch it back to Bezier, and now we're going to draw our outline for the Gap Spline. I'm going to put the first point at the center of this shape here, and we're going to need another point about here, one down here, and here. And for the last point we don't need any tangents, so I'm just going to left click to create that point somewhere over here. And I'm going beyond that vertical line a bit in order to make sure that once we combine all of these Gap Splines we get an intersection with the outline, because we need to make sure we can subtract our Gap Splines from the outline later. The reason I created the Helper Spline is because I want to make sure that I'm getting straight lines here and here. Now, of course, what we could do is we could get rid of one of these tangents and thus get a straight line. And sometimes that will work, but sometimes what you get is a corner, and I want a smooth transition from this curve to that straight line. And the best way to do that is to keep both handles. However, we need to make sure that the tangents of the points here are perfectly lined up with our spline to get that straight line. And the easiest way to do that is by using a Helper Spline. So I'm going to go back a few steps so I have both tangents again, and let's switch on our Helper Spline. And next we need to switch on snapping, and we want to make sure that we snap to splines. And now I'm going to select my Gap Spline and start snapping the points to the Helper Spline. And now we can start snapping the tangents to the Helper Spline. And by doing this, we can make sure that we get a perfectly straight line. Okay, so now we can switch off snapping again, and let's switch off the Helper Spline and we can start tweaking the tangents to get the shape that we want. And maybe I'm going to move this top point down a little bit further. I'm also going to open the values and tangents window, and let's make sure that our tangents on this top point are perfectly horizontal. So now we can select the pen tool again, make sure that lock tangent rotation is switched on, and we can start modifying those tangents. Something like this maybe. Next I want to test how this gap spline looks, so we have to close the spline, and I'm going to create an additional point on this line and drag this over somewhere to here, and let's add an extrude object and render this. And I think it's looking pretty much perfect down here, and up here, let's see, I don't really like that shape yet. Maybe we could select this point here and drag out this tangent a little bit further. Yeah, or maybe let's move it back a bit. So I think this is looking pretty good. So let's select this point, delete it, and uncheck close spline again. In the next video we're going to create the outline, and I'm also going to use a slightly different technique for creating that outline. So let's go ahead and do that in the next video.